Hello, everybody. It's Miss Given. I can't be with you today in person, but I figured I'll record me doing my notes so that it's just like normal class. So today we're going to learn about something called congruence and transformations, and you've got a pretty good idea at what both of these things are. Go ahead and write your title with me, and then draw your line down your paper like we usually do. And feel free to pause this video anytime. That way you don't feel rushed when you're taking your notes, or you can rewind if you need to get a little bit more clarity. So congruence and transformations, first thing that we're going to kind of remind ourselves of is, what does it mean if something is congruent? It's the first word that we're going to write over on the right side. And congruent, you should feel super familiar with that now. We talked about that with our angles and then a little bit with our shapes. It's figures that have the same shape, size, and angles. Go ahead and write that out on your paper. Figures have same shape, size, and angles. It has to have all three of those things. And when figures have this, that could be a result of a couple kinds of transformations. So the only three that gave you a congruent figure at the end were a translation, a rotation, or a reflection. Remember that dilation is the last one we learned, but it actually changed the size of our shape, and therefore it wouldn't be congruent. Write out this little note. It can be a result of a translation, rotation, or reflection. So we're good on what congruent means. Now we've got to talk about what it means to not be congruent. And that's when figures are going to have a different shape, size, and or angles. So it only needs to have one of these three things be different in order for it to not be congruent. So your definition again, figures have different shape, size, and or angles. And we're going to do some examples together of what this actually looks like. You're going to be given a couple of different shapes, and then you get to decide, are the figures congruent or are they not? And if they're not congruent, how come? Is it they have a different shape? Is it that they have a different size? Or is it that they've got different angles? So here's your first one, A. Go ahead and draw these out with me. You're going to have two triangles. Our first one is going to be triangle ABC. And then you'll have another triangle, and this one is going to be XYZ. So we're comparing these two to each other. We're going to see, are these congruent or not? Remember, congruent means the same size, same shape, and the same angles. Obviously, they're both triangles, so we can see that. If we counted our boxes to kind of see what the lengths of those sides are, they're actually the same, even though one is flipped the other direction. So we're going to say, yes, these are congruent. And in order to get from triangle ABC to the XYZ, we could see that it's reflected. And we can think about that being reflected over our y-axis. And then it's translated. And we don't know exactly how many up or down. We don't really care right now. We just want to kind of see the motion that that shape is taking. So your answer to this one would be yes, congruent, and then it's reflected, then translated. We'll do another one kind of similar to that. This is B. Draw these shapes out with me. This time they look a little different. They're not like a normal shape that we would see. So here's my first shape. You can color it in if you want to. And then your second one, and we'll start to compare those two to each other. So are they congruent or not? Take a guess. What do you think? If I started with that first shape, I'm going to think I need to reflect that over so that it's facing the same direction. But that little square part that's off to the left of my first shape and the right of my second shape, they're actually in different places. So this is not the same shape and it's not going to be congruent. And again, that reason is just because they're not the same shape. They're really close to it, but it's not exactly the same. We're going to do one more example here. So again, just comparing two shapes or two figures to each other. This is your last one in this section, C. Then I've got this diamond, and then I've got one more diamond. Now take a guess. What do you think? Are these going to be congruent or are they not congruent? I'm going to look at them first and say, okay, are they the same shape? And the answer to that is yes, right? They've got that same look. But my next question is, are they the same size? And the answer is no. One of them is smaller, one of them's bigger. So they're not going to be congruent. And my reason for it is that they are not the same size. All right, so that's one type of example that you're going to see and have to understand how to do. We're going to do one other type of example. This is example 2. And for this one, we are going to determine the transformation. So similar to before, you're going to be given two figures or two shapes, two lines, and you have to decide how do we start at one and turn into the other one. And again, we're talking about congruent figures here. So if there's some kind of dilation that has to happen, our answer is just that it's not going to be congruent and we can't use that transformation in these types of problems. Here's your first one, A. You're going to be given two line segments. One of them is AB, and the other one is going to be CD. Make sure when you're drawing these, you're paying attention to the length of your lines. That way your notes make sense for the answers that you get. All right, we're going to compare those two. The first thing that has to happen is AB has to be reflected. It's got to be reflected over that y-axis. And then we're going to see if we reflect that, is that going to finish the transformation? We actually have to translate it 3 units down in order to get it into this spot for CD. So that's the second move that you kind of have to make if you're given this picture. So your answer is reflected over the y-axis and translated 3 units down. We'll do two more examples here. Here's your next one, B. And for this one, you've got a triangle. It's going to be triangle LMN. And then I'm going to have another triangle that is going to be QRS. And if you start to kind of take a guess at what that initial triangle's got to do to turn into QRS, we can see that for sure it needs to rotate. And then we can take a guess. Are we going to rotate clockwise or are we going to go counterclockwise? Really, you could do either, right? But it's going to be quicker if I go clockwise. And that would be a 90-degree rotation clockwise. And I'll just write CW for my clockwise. And then step number 2, it's going to be translated down again. And those two would be your answers. So rotated 90 degrees counter or 90 degrees clockwise, and then it's translated down. And we're going to do one final example together. All right, last one, example C. You can start to draw out a rectangle with me. This is going to be rectangle DEFG. And then I'm going to have another rectangle. And this one is going to be WXYZ. And then kind of like we did in the first example, we want to decide, are these congruent or not? If they're not, we aren't going to determine what the transformation was. So congruent means they've got to be the same shape, same size, and have the same angles. Well, this one is the same shape, but are they the same size? Nope. So not congruent for this one, and that would be your final answer. All right, we're going to take a quick look back at what we talked about through these notes. So remember, we started with those definitions up at the top. You found out that congruent meant they've got to have the same shape, the same size, and be the same angles. Remember, this could be a result of a translation, a rotation, or a reflection. And then if it's not congruent, they're going to have a different shape, size, or angles. And that first example, we saw how we could determine if they are congruent or not. And then the second one is we're going to determine if they're congruent, and then we get to choose what that transformation is going to be. Hopefully this helps you. If you've got any questions, feel free to email me and I am happy to help you out.